That means obedience and hardship can exist at the same time. Faith and dryness can exist at the same time. A promise and pressure can exist at the same time. God's instruction and a difficult environment can exist at the same time. When obedience requires you to step into the famine. So Elijah went to appear before Ahab. Meanwhile, the famine had become very severe in Samaria. 1 Kings 18:2. I need you to read that again. It says, so Elijah went to appear before Ahab. Elijah appeared before what? Before who? Because Elijah is not walking into a peaceful environment. He's not walking into celebration. He's not walking into a comfortable season. He is walking into famine. He is walking into confrontation. He is walking into the place God told him to go. And sometimes obedience does not begin in perfect conditions. And sometimes obedience does not begin in perfect conditions. Sometimes obedience begins while the famine is still severe. The verse says Elijah went to appear before Ahab. Ahab was not a neutral person in Elijah's life. Ahab was the king. Ahab had turned away from the Lord. Ahab had allowed idolatry to spread. Ahab was connected to the very spiritual corruption Elijah had confronted. So when God tells Elijah to appear before Ahab, this is not just a casual meeting. This is uncomfortable. This is confrontational, and it can get dangerous. Elijah is being sent back into the center of resistance, where he's not even wanted. And isn't that something? Sometimes the place God sends you is not the place that feels the safest. Sometimes God sends you back into a conversation you would rather avoid. Sometimes God asks you to stand in the truth in a room where truth is not welcome. Sometimes obedience looks like facing what you would have preferred to escape. But Elijah went, not because Ahab was safe or the situation was easy. Elijah went because God has spoken. The verse continues. Meanwhile, the famine had become very severe in Samaria. Elijah is obeying God, but the environment is still suffering. He is moving forward, but the land is still dry. He is carrying a promise of rain, but the famine has still not lifted. And this is where many of us struggle, because we think obedience should immediately change what we see. We think if we obey God, the drought should end right away. The pressure should lift right away. The door should open right away. The pain should make sense right away. But this verse shows us something different. Elijah obeys while the famine is still severe. That means obedience and hardship can exist at the same time. Faith and dryness can exist at the same time. A promise and pressure can exist at the same time. God's instruction in a difficult environment can exist at the same time. And for someone listening today, that may be your life. You obeyed, but things are still hard. You prayed, but the situation still looks dry. You forgave, but healing is still in process. You stepped back, but your heart is still grieving. You said yes to God, but the famine around you has not changed yet. And I want you to know, the presence of famine does not mean the absence of God. Sometimes the famine is the very place where God is about to reveal himself. This verse teaches us that there are moments where God calls us to move before circumstances improve. That's hard, because we often want the atmosphere to confirm the instructions. We want peace around us before we obey. We want people to understand before we step in. We want the evidence before we trust. But Elijah teaches us that obedience is not based on the condition of the land. Obedience is based on the voice of God. And sometimes God will say, go while it still looks dry. Speak while it still feels uncomfortable. Move while you still feel nervous. Trust me before you see rain. Step forward before the famine breaks. This does not mean we move recklessly. It means when God has spoken clearly, we do not let fear become louder than his instructions. I wonder what Elijah felt in this moment. After years of hiddenness, God tells him to come out. But he's not coming out to comfort. He's coming out to confront. He's not coming out to a changed nation. He's coming out to a severe famine. That must have carried weight. Maybe Elijah felt the seriousness of the assignment. Maybe he felt the tension of returning to public visibility. Maybe he knew Ahab would not receive him warmly. Maybe he knew the people were suffering. Maybe he could feel the dryness in the land and the urgency in the spirit. But still, he went. And this reminds me that courage is not absence of emotion. Courage is obedience in the presence of emotion. Sometimes you can be nervous and still be obedient. You can feel the weight and still go. You can have questions and still trust. You can feel the dryness and still carry the promise. This verse is especially powerful for anyone who feels like God has had you hidden. Maybe you have had been in a season where no one really saw the depth of what God was doing in you. Maybe you have been healing quietly, learning, grieving, growing quietly, being sustained quietly. And now you feel the Lord beginning to say, go. But when you look around, things do not look easy. The famine is still severe. The environment is still complicated. The people are still the same. The situation still feels dry. And maybe you're wondering, God, are you sure this is the time? Sometimes God does not wait for everything around you to change before he releases you. Sometimes he changes you first. Then he sends you back with a different strength. Elijah did not come out of hiding because the famine ended. He came out because God said it was time. That's important. The end of a hidden season is not always marked by comfort. Sometimes it is marked by instruction. And I want to remind you today, do not measure God's timing by the dryness of the land. Do not assume he's absent because the famine is still severe. Do not believe you missed him just because obedience feels uncomfortable. Sometimes the next step of God happens while the environment still looks unchanged. Sometimes the promise begins moving when the evidence appears. Sometimes the rain is already on the way, but first God asks you to take one obedient step. So breathe. You do not have to have all the details. You do not have to control the outcome. You do not have to make the rain come. You only have to respond to the voice that said, go. Because when God sends you, he goes with you. And when God promises rain, dryness does not get the last word. With love, seal. A verse to breathe.